On the following of our REST API in Django tutorials, we're going to continue with our views.py and complete it so that we can add other methods such as get, put, and delete to our REST framework and be able to do all kinds of operations on our database. So we're going to create a new class and we're going to name this class to-do detail API view. So to-do detail API view. And so this is going to get the API views, API view, and now we're going to add the permission classes just the same as what we did in the last function, in the last class. So let me copy and paste it over here. And there we go. So here we're going to create a new function for getting the data by the user ID and also the to-do ID. So we create a new function, def get object, and it's going to get some attributes. So one of them is the user ID, the other one is the to-do ID, and also keyword arguments and also arguments. So first one of which is self, the other one is request, and the other one is the to-do ID. We're going to use the request for the user, to-do underline ID, and the other one is arguments, and finally the last one is double asterisk keyword arguments. There we go. And so let's get into the function and write it. So the first thing we need to do is to get the object according to the to-do ID and the request user ID according to the user ID. So we use the request and then we get the user ID. So let's define a variable called to-do ID or to-do instance, which is going to be equal to self.get underline object, and inside here we're going to get to-do ID and also request .user .id. So it's going to get the data according to the to-do ID and also the user ID. So it's going to specify exactly which data it's going to get. And so we're going to also check whether the data exists or not. So we're going to use if statement, if not to-do instance. So for example, you enter the user ID and you log in with the user ID, you're a user, but you don't have the to-do ID, or there's no other way, because once you log in, the user exists. So if the to-do instance does not exist, the to-do ID hasn't been created yet. So right here, we're going to check if the to-do instance exists. And so here we're going to return a response if it does not exist. Return response. And so here I'm going to open the parentheses, and so it's going to be a kind of a dictionary-like collection. So we have res, and object with to-do ID does not exist. So here we're going to say object with the given to-do ID does not exist. And also what we're going to add here is the status. So here we're inside of this dictionary. So let me get the complete statement over here. Let's put it inside of curly brackets, and then let's also write our response status. So status equals status dot HTTP, and so here again we're going to use bad request, which is 400. So let's find it. So this is the bad request. There we go. So now it's been completed. Let me also add this one to the next line so that it's much more cleaner. There we go. So now, otherwise, if the to-do instance exists, we're going to add it to the serializer. So let's define a serializer, and so it's going to be equal to to-do serializer that we have imported right above, and so to-do instance, to-do underline instance, and here is what we're going to use. So the to-do instance that we have defined. So now we have serialized this data, and now we're ready to return the response accordingly. So return response and serializer.data, then status equals to status. Also, let me write my code cleaner. And this is going to be HTTP 200, which is okay. So we're going to get the serialized data, and also we're going to send the status HTTP. Okay, so that's it for this part of the function. So now so here we've learned how to get the data, but also actually let us also get the data in another way. So this is the way that we have got the object, but let us get what we want first. So here what happens is that we log in with the user ID and we check for the to-do ID. So it's better to name this get because it's closer to the get request, not get object. And get object is when we get the to-do list according to the user ID. So this is not the request from the user, this is the request from outside to see if there is a to-do ID with this certain user and from with a certain to-do ID. So let us also define another function. So press tab and def, and here I'm gonna call this get object. So get object, and here we're going to have only the to-do ID and the user, which is the user ID. So first of all, self as always, and to-do ID underline ID, and also we're going to have user underline ID, and then we're going to try to get if there is anything called the to-do ID and the user ID without a specific user and the to-do ID. So we're only going to return, see if we can return so to-do object. So this is not a response, this is just checking whether this is going to exist. This actually does exist. So to-do.object.get, and here we simply enter ID equals to-do ID, to-do underline ID, and also we're going to add user equals to user underline ID, and then we're going to add except. So here, if no object with that kind of a specification exists, is going to return nothing. So that's it. So up to here we've learned how to query data from database. In this function, we first of all check whether anything with that kind of specific user and to-do ID exists. And this is the main one for our get method inside of the HTTP request, or our REST framework method, which is get in this case. And here the request will be created by the user with that specific ID and the to-do ID, and it will get to do that specific to-do ID. So if it does not exist, it will return a kind of a response, which is a which will be the bad request 400. And if it does exist, it will serialize the data and return the response, which will include the serialized data and the 200 status, which means it's okay. So that's it for this part. In the next part, we are also going to complete the views.py and add the put and delete methods to our REST API views. So that's it for this part of our video.